Have you ever looked at your Switch Pro controller and thought, man, I wish this was an Ouya controller? Yeah, me neither. But someone out there did. Yep. This is real life. So what we have here is a wireless Pro controller for Switch. That part's in cursive, the other part's not for whatever reason, that is based on what I think is one of the worst controllers that we've seen in a while for a given console as like its main controller. We've seen some pretty bad third-party controllers. This was technically a first-party type controller for the Ouya. If you want to learn more about that system, I did a full teardown of that. You can check the link in the description below if you'd like to see more about that. But when this popped up and I saw it on Amazon, it was $25, and it is legitimately a knockoff of the Ouya controller for the Switch. I had to pick it up and check it out because it just seems too ridiculous to pass on. So let's see how bad this thing is. All right, so let's actually look inside the box. Again, this was only $25, so it wasn't like an expensive thing to get, but it's still really weird to see this pop up. So we take this guy out. There is pretty much the controller, nothing else really outside of, I think, a cable that comes with it. But the controller obviously has the color scheme for a Switch that you would expect with kind of the neon blue and red. And then it does have a USB Type-C cable. It's fairly short, but yes, this is using USB-C, so that's at least something there. I do like that most third-party controllers, even if they're not great for the Switch, seem to have adopted USB Type-C the way that Nintendo has with their stuff. So that's actually really cool to see. And then we have just a very small guide for how to set it up and everything with instructions. And that's about it. Now, looking over the controller, it's not great. It feels pretty cheap, to be honest. I mean, it's a $25 controller. Ooh, man. When you press these shoulder buttons, it is not good. The shoulder buttons, oh, look at the travel. There is a lot of travel for what is basically a digital trigger. Remember, the buttons back here are digital, they're not analog, so they're not actually benefiting from that long travel distance. It just takes longer to press the thing. So they end up feeling very mushy. Now, looking around the controller, it's kind of a cheaper plastic. It's kind of light, but it does have rumble. Wait a minute. No, we're making the controller look too cool. You know what? Let's kill the backlight. No, let's turn the floodlight off actually. Yeah, you know, just go ahead and turn the whole camera off. Now, the buttons themselves on top are glossy. They press all right, though. Like, the button doesn't feel bad when you press down. These feel really bad. The plus and minus, and then the home and snapshot do not feel good at all. It's weird. It's hard to describe. It's almost like it wants to be tactile, but then it's also kind of mushy at the same time. It is not a good feeling. And honestly, reaching over to hit it is actually pretty difficult just because of the way it's set up. It's, of course, that Ouya feel, that Ouya look, but I just don't think this controller was ever really designed to have that kind of a reach to like where the plus and minus is set up here. The home and snapshot are a bit easier to reach, and then the D-pad is just a full tactile clicky D-pad, so it doesn't roll particularly well or anything. It's basically similar to if you change the buttons out on the Joy-Con controller to this. It's similar to that, where it's basically all 4 separate buttons without a soft membrane, so it doesn't really roll that well or hit diagonals well. The sticks are interesting because they're shorter, so you can actually see they're shorter than like your standard sticks in like a Pro controller, for example. Not technically shorter, I guess, than something like what's in the Joy-Con. So if you're used to that, you'd probably be used to this, looking at it. And they click all right. They have a loud click. You can really hear that. They move all right too. They're kind of loose, but they're not loose to the point where I think it would be a distraction. Most of the joysticks that come out for like third-party controllers now are pretty good. I think they have that pretty much figured out now. It's just they're very short and they're very loud. Otherwise, though, looking at the top, the biggest weakness of this thing, you can even hear them. It's exactly what I remember feeling with the Ouya. Just these very gross feeling shoulder buttons in the back for the triggers. No benefit at all for that travel distance, none. On the back we have what I assume to be a warranty sticker for a screw, and nothing else. They quote 5 hours of battery life on this, about a 2 to 3 hour charge, so it charges about half as long as it needs to be operational, which most people who have a Pro controller look at that and say, well, why can't it have 40 hours like the Pro controller or whatnot? I don't know. It's just the way that they have it set up. USB Type-C at the top, and then we have a sync button. This controller will not turn your system on, so it does not have that functionality that we've seen some third-party controllers have. Not every one, but some. And then, of course, it will plug in, and as soon as it's plugged into the Switch, it will sync up, and it will work from there wirelessly. Has a red indicator light at the top that tells you if it's first, second, third, or fourth player, and it's almost like they didn't have that, they don't have the LED close enough to the edge here to where it won't bleed through to all the other spots, so keep that in mind. They probably could have used like a piece of plastic to go from the LED to the top there, just try to minimize that, but it does shine through like all the spots, which is not great. Weight of the controller isn't bad because it's supposed to have rumble motors in each side here, so it's heavier than some of those really light third-party controllers we've dealt with before, and it's certainly bottom heavy from what I can tell. Like, it always wants to fall down, and it can actually stand up on its own for the most part after you set it up. So think about that too. It's definitely weighted more towards the bottom to where your palms are, and actually that's something I like. I actually like having more weight in the palm than at the top, because it's more weighted to, like, when you hold it, it kind of sits better in your hands rather than just be top heavy and it'll fall forward. So I do like that. Now we can go ahead and open this guy up. It's together just like we saw the Ouya controller, where the front will pop off, and I guess it comes up from the front at that point. I don't know if I like front mounted ones. I like the screws just being on the back and easy to access, but should be able to just pop these off with some force. Yeah, it seems like they basically just used the entirety of what like the Ouya shell was for the controller, which is really weird. I don't really know why you would, out of all the controllers, you go for the Ouya controller. Maybe it'd be different, that's all I can assume, because we've seen like basically 360 controller shells, right? We've seen full-on Pro controller shells for the Switch be used, and then I guess somebody was just like, hey, that Ouya controller though, let's do that. You know what, maybe somebody out there really liked the Ouya controller and they wanted one for their Switch, and then they decided to sell it after building it. I don't know, it would not have been my first choice, I'll just say that. Okay, so the screw's out there, we can take this guy out and flip it around. There are our motors for the rumble. And you can see just these, look at these springs, my gosh. The longest springs ever, right? And that reminds me again of the Ouya controller. Just that travel is insane because, again, there's no analog to the Switch itself. It doesn't use analog triggers. So that is really funny. It almost looks like this might actually have analog like designed for it, because you can see this piece of plastic move down. Oh, it's very much greased up too, where it will actually push down like that, and you can see it move. So I do wonder if this actually has analog triggers in it, but the Switch, of course, can't really recognize them. I think that's possible because it does look like the input's there. So keep that in mind, I guess. This is technically a Switch controller that has analog triggers to it. Oh, the battery plugs in. That's nice. I mean, for what it's worth, it's a very small battery, by the way. It is. I mean, it is tiny. It's a 380 milliamp hour battery. It's not great, we'll say that. And looking at this controller, it just really reminds me of the Ouya controller inside. It really does. We got our antenna up here, out of the way of anything that would interfere with it, so that's nice. Man, these springs are just massive. Let me pull this guy out here and this guy. There's really not a ton to look at in here. It's just a very basic controller. So everything has started to fall out. These buttons did anyway. These front bumpers here, the R and L, are actually soldered to the board. They're not plug-ins or even part of it. They've actually wired them around, probably because these very large buttons are in the way. Let me see if this... Yeah, okay, cool. So the analog sticks, the reason I say that at this point is because they're all using pretty much the same analog sticks at this point. They're very easy to get, and they have the same kind of feel that we have with something like an Xbox One controller now, where it has that same fluid motion around. These are very easy sticks to get at this point, so that's why I'm probably okay with a lot of these third-party controllers with their analog sticks, because they're all pretty much just using the same thing now. They just basically decide on how long they want their analog sticks to be. They decided to go with a very short one here, and that's just the way it is on that. So let me take this out. I want to just take a quick look at this D-pad. So the D-pad's using its own board. They decided to just plug it in. It's using a very shallow membrane on this, and that's why you get that click. And unfortunately, it's raised up as well, so it's hard to hit all four. It's pretty much impossible, to be honest, the way they have it set up with that D-pad, where the spike actually has a spot to go there, which is nice. And all 4 directions are actually pretty hard to hit. But it is basically 4 different buttons that have very shallow membranes on them that give a nice click. So they're not going to roll very well, but they will at least give you very accurate presses. So if anything, if you just want, I guess, a controller that has a very accurate D-pad for something like Tetris that you can't really roll that well, but you can just press them, there you go. Technically, this has a good D-pad for that. Not for fighting games, but for something like Tetris, you'd be in good shape. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Ouya controller for the Nintendo Switch. Now you might ask why, to which someone will just reply, because. And really, there's no reason to buy this that I can see outside of just the novelty and just because. The only thing it really has going for it is a very accurate D-pad, mostly because it's just 4 buttons that's divided up by a cross-shaped D-pad, obviously, without any type of plastic between for rolls, and that's about it. Some of the worst triggers that we've seen, obviously, on the Ouya controller translate over to this with no analog function. That's about it. There's not a lot to like about this, but it's very funny to see an Ouya controller made for the Nintendo Switch. Let me know what you guys think about this controller down below. I'm very curious. Make sure you guys like the video if you enjoyed it, dislike it if not, and I'll see you in the next video.